I think it comes from what this idea in America that we have to be this individualistic nature. Like, if I can't do it by myself, then I shouldn't do it. Versus newsflash, human beings are actually very social. We form our cliques and our pods for a reason, right? And it's not going to change when you get older.
Today's guest is Francis LeGasse. Francis is the co-founder and managing partner of Assured Senior Living, a company dedicated to providing dignified, purpose-built ranch-style homes to cultivate a community among seniors, particularly those living with dementia. During this conversation, he references his over 14 years of experience in the senior living industry, demonstrating his passion about creating care models that prioritize respect and proactive care. His perspective that a dementia diagnosis is not the end, it's simply a change in the ending, becomes clear as he points to his own experience with his grandparents among the number of other patients Assured Senior Living has cared for. Here's a fact. We're all aging at the same rate and will inevitably face decisions referenced in this conversation, whether it's in the days or years ahead. He addresses advice for guilt-ridden family members responsible for making difficult late-in-life decisions, how he battled through the pandemic and public resistance as they grew, and what the future of aging looks like. Let's start the show. Thanks for being on. Super excited to have you. I want to talk about your business, obviously, Assured Assisted Living, but something that really touched me personally, which I think is sort of where this all started, the genesis. I'm wondering if you could just sort of kick it off and talk to me a little bit about your grandfather.
You don't really realize what aging is, I think, until you experience it. As a kid, you always think it's, everyone's essentially, like Superman, right? Especially look at that generation. My two grandfathers were, born, in the 30s, if I recall from their birth dates. And, they were just tough, right? You look at them, really tough. And, my dad's father, so my paternal grandfather, he was a military vet for 23 years. He lied on his application at 16 to go to World War II. He did, a tour in Korea, 2 tours in Vietnam as a 42-year-old guy. I mean, and he was 5'7", 140 pounds of nothing, but man, he was a tough son of a gun, right? And then my other grandfather was a Navy guy during World War II. And just wicked smart. He worked for General Motors for about 50 years, master's in engineering, University of Michigan. So that's kind of where our lineage started, where, I went to school. But then, aging hit. He worked until he was about 77. My grandfather that worked for General Motors, my grandpa DeClaire is what we called him. And something kind of was off with him. We weren't really sure what, but then it, started to show, and then it was a formal diagnosis of Parkinson's. He didn't really have the tremors, but he had a lot of that rigidness, the stiffness, some of the other issues that occurred with Parkinson's. And then there was the bitterness, though, of the frustration of this is no way to live, and all these other, factors that rightfully so come into play. And you saw the stress on not just my grandmother, who lost during his, time when he was, they were carrying about 50, 60 pounds of weight, under the stress. And then my mom was the only daughter in the family. So she took a lot of the brunt as well too, right? Of, well, I've got to help navigate this. We got to get care in. And then grandpa didn't want care. And he was just like kicking people out. And, you tried some of the communities or the facilities, which I hate that word. And it just was never a fit. It was just never good. And then home was where he wanted to be, but he didn't want the help. And it was a lot of stress on my grandmother to try to help him move with a walker. Right. And ultimately he had a wicked fall that he never left the hospital from. That's what caused his passing. He had to essentially what is somewhat common in Parkinson's. He froze and fell straight backwards, and he fractured his 4th and 5th vertebrae. And he spent almost 60 days in the hospital. He did a 12-hour surgery on an 85-year-old guy. He had his 86th birthday in the hospital and just never could recover. Never shook the fluid that was around his lungs and things like that. And we brought hospice in the hospital. It was a wonderful celebration of life, but at the same time, it really resonates with, what are we doing here? What are we really doing with how we look at this generation that's done so much? And, you walk around, at least in Colorado here, you see more older adults that are homeless, more older adults that are struggling with either, substance or mental health issues. And is that really what we want? from our society is that's really kind of where we're going is, and the longer I've been doing this, I'm gonna come up almost on 15 years here. We got to fix it. We got to figure something out because our current path is just not where it needs to be.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit down the line, just about aging and how I think we're aging differently, right? I think it's not unreasonable, whether you're a David Sinclair follower or not, to expect that with our attitude and awareness of health and certainly mental health, but also what our nutrition and physical health, coupled with technologies that are accelerating at an increased rate. I don't think it's unusual to expect, certainly to some degree, our generation, but generations beneath us, to live much, much longer. And the idea of being able to live longer is promising, but it really requires something else in addition to it. It's not about length of time; it's about the quality of the time you have. And I witnessed it, just to give some context on, I think, why it's so interesting to me, on two fronts. One, my godfather, it was my dad's best friend, but he was as close as any family member, closer than any family member I had outside of my parents. And he, started to get a little bit forgetful over a couple of years. My dad noticed it. His father, my Uncle Gene's father, also suffered from dementia. I think actually both of his parents. And when he got diagnosed, it was within 6 months. He just sort of went south, and he was put into an assisted living facility. And I'm very limited in my knowledge of this, but sort of pausing that and putting another element of data here, that my grandmother now is in an assisted living and is struggling quite a bit, and we're seeing her fall victim to dementia, and physically and metaphorically fall. And it's interesting you bring up the fall, because the physical fall tends to lead to a number of, your body, for whatever reason, seems to give in oftentimes at that point in life. You just can't really recover. And you brought up something pretty interesting to me, which is sort of how you see these superheroes. Growing up, it was certainly my parents, but grandparents as well, where they sort of know better, and to put some framing on your grandparents, your grandfathers. They were, the first 10 years of life were in the Great Depression. I mean, they endured considerable hardships, and then leading into World War II, that generation is coined the greatest generation for a reason, right? Sort of to bring that home, I guess, what, how involved were you in that, and how did that sort of spawn your journey into, developing your entity?
Heavily. I mean, I'm really close with my parents. So we were really, I grew up 15 minutes from my grandpa to Claire, who had Parkinson's. As growing up, we would spend a lot of the holidays there, and we were about 4-hour drive to my grandpa Lagasse in Niagara, in New York, Central Niagara Falls, New York, on the western side of New York. So we had great relationships with our grandparents, both grandma and grandpa, as well as, both sides. And you don't know what you don't know, right? As a 27-year-old, when we started Home Care, we just thought, we had these family stories, we had this entrepreneurship. We just wanted to try to do something good, because, and that's kind of where it started. I think we were naive in what we were actually stepping into, in the sense that we thought we could, really impact and change the world. Right. I think it was, two former competitive, track guys from Michigan that, really don't like to lose, so we thought, hey, we've seen, the competition, it's not bad, but we think we can do better. And, we really focused on the care. That's where we focused. What was really evident for us was, one, memory care is an afterthought. Like in all these large communities, it's I want 80 beds and 90 beds assisted living, and then maybe 20 beds of true memory care, right? The second is their staffing ratios. They're like a 1-15, 1-12, when it comes to that, to make their numbers work. We want to put our money in the staff. We're a 1-4 ratio at most of our homes. One caregiver for 4 residents, which is unheard of in our industry. And what we found is we have residents that rebound. They come to us on this kind of negative sliding slope, right? Because they're isolated, they're lonely, they're not eating. But when they have someone that sits there and is like, hey, let's sit for 15 minutes. Let's talk about you. And obviously some of the stories could be circular, or the human touch element, where I can hold your hand while you're telling me a story. That's a bond that can help. Not maybe reverse any type of the diagnoses, but maybe we can slow it down a little bit and shift that ending to where it's not just, God, this sucks. My mom's got dementia, to, oh my God, my mom painted. She never liked to paint. That's really cool. Or wait, mom went for a walk with you with the dog. She doesn't like dogs. Well, she does now, like some of those really positive window moments that we can create because our staff is there. We're there. And we have to go back to our greatest gift we can give anyone is the gift of our time and our presence. And when you have a loved one on that cognitive journey that's muddled and emotional and confusing for everyone involved, sometimes the best thing is just being there and saying nothing. And we always want to fix it, right? In America, we want to fix it. We want to triage. Memory care and all these things, they're not to triage. It's to show the compassion that you're a person. I love you and I'm here for you through whatever it may be.
I think that resonates quite a bit because we talk about mental health a lot, and more than anything, relationships come. The data demonstrates it over and over again. There are vast amounts of data that corroborate that. No matter. I was just listening to a podcast this morning, and they were referencing an experiment where rats in isolation would navigate toward the one bottle of water that had a narcotic of some sort, and it was sort of self-numbing. And in other experiments where there was a community of rats, they put both bottles of water, including the one with narcotics, and invariably those with a social community always chose over time. They always chose the water because it was those relationships. How do you staff that? I mean, to hire those types of people, and my experience in hiring, that's not exactly an easy task, right? And the stakes are high because the people who are coming to your communities are entrusting you with their loved ones and you're an extension of that family in many regards. So how do you go about that, and what's their training process like?
One, it's building out a great team in general. We've got a phenomenal COO, Stephanie. We've got great executive directors, Lisa, and we've got Brittany, Sydney. We've got just a great leadership team. But on top of that, we have caregivers that love. I mean, we start from a place of just being a good person, right? And a lot of them do have the clinical skill set, of course, but really in our environment, it's not just clinical. It's more of that social emotional connection, right? You definitely need to know how to do your transfers and you work with your gait belt. So obviously we do those trainings, repetitively. We always do, fall management programs, and we really train on all the actual physical aspects. But you alluded to it. There's studies out that show isolation and loneliness can knock, I think it's 3 to 5 years off someone's life. It's like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's not just, hey, I need to make sure I know how to change an undergarment or give a shower, right? Or assist with a medication, right? It's beyond that. So we really look at the person's heart first and foremost. Do they have that love, compassion? And I do think our model with being better staffed actually increases our retention because our staff isn't in that foxhole, isn't in that hardship by themselves, and they're not overburdened. They're not running around trying to take care of 12, 15, 20 people by themselves, right? They've got a teammate that's maybe it's 8 or 9 people, right? And it's a lot different stress when it's 2 of you for 8 or 9 versus 1 of you for whatever, 12, 13, 14, right? And we as organizations create our own burnout, right? We lean on our best staff. And so what happens is they'll work their tail off for their residents maybe 2-3 months straight, right? But then they're going to hit a wall because how often, I mean, think about it. How fast can you move between residents? If I have 12 residents, theoretically, per hour, I have 60 minutes. I can give each resident 5 minutes. That doesn't make sense. That's not possible, right? So, it's going to take me a minute alone to walk between the rooms probably at some of the larger communities, right? So I've got 4 minutes, but then I've got to get someone who might have cognitive impairment to understand who I am in 4 minutes without feeling rushed and then causing a behavior. Doesn't happen. Because if I come in hot and aggressive, my anxiety or energy is going to pass on to someone that has any form of cognitive or physical. And I just started turning that wheel of just, anxiety for everybody involved. It also comes when we do a big thing, we try to look at staff housing. We have a lot of affordable staff housing that's built onto our communities as well too. So that helps a lot with our retention, is they don't have to worry about housing. We also, there's some food that's provided as well too. So, we pay pretty good wages, but we also have some ancillary stuff that's beyond just their hourly rate. And, I think it's really important.
So I was just going to ask, I mean, this is a competitive environment. You are competing against other facilities, and there is a profitable compulsion in this industry. I mean, we've heard all of the sort of horror stories during COVID, that came out as when things get hectic and things go awry, that's when sort of the roaches come out, right? How do you approach that? I mean, how do you retain that talent? Obviously, pay is a component. You alluded to the housing and the food, but what is a priority that you found to be a common characteristic among those that you hire as loyal candidates? And I'll sort of add to this real quick as sort of an add-on from my perspective. This is not the same thing, but recently I had a baby boy a little under 2 years ago, and we brought on a nanny early on. And it's very interesting to go through that process because you can look at the pedigree, you can look at the credentials, you can talk to the references. And by and large, almost all of those check out. But what you're really hiring is somebody that you are going to pay, which is transactional, to love your child. And I think there's a parallel here in that, people are paying your organization to love their loved one. And in order to do that, you really do need to create longevity there. So maybe if you could speak to that, I think that's super helpful.
Yeah. You can, again, we're a big believer. You can teach anybody how to do a transfer with the gate belt, right? You can teach anybody how to do a quick brief change. You can teach anybody those task-based stuff, right? But in our space, it's the intangibles are really what matters. And honestly, what we find is some of the best way we've done it is if we have a great experience of hiring friends or family members of a caregiver that's really shows that love and attention. I mean, that's really where it comes down to, is the same core belief of the people. And I will say our admin team, Stephanie, our COO, leads this team very well. And they create this culture of love. I mean, one of our taglines is love. It's what we do. And because at the end of the day, you're right. Do we have caregivers that not only have this physical skill set, but they can love on those residents? And we use a lot of kind of just talking to current staff members about potential staff members, right? Getting a vibe from them. They meet with other staff members before we even hire them so that the staff can kind of even get a feel. They'll always shadow with a staff member before they're ever kind of fully deployed, if that's even the case. We've had people that have shadowed for 2 or 3 days and we've never moved forward because the caregiver that was shadowed was like, I don't think they kind of get what we do. I just don't think it's a good fit. And the team's like, okay, we won't push it, right? And I do think it's, at the end of the day, your staff needs to know that we work for them. I mean, I know I hate the word servant leadership. I think it's overused. It's, it's just like patient-centric care. What BS does that actually really mean, right? It's all these buzzwords that we use to make ourselves feel like, oh, it's a branding thing, right? No. To me, at the end of the day, it's people taking care of people. If we as leaders take care of the people who take care of our residents, that's as simple as that. And if that circle stays happy, we're going to crush it. Everyone's going to do well, both emotionally, physically, and financially. It's that simple. I think it's, this idea of, what's your patient-centric care plan? It's like, well, if it's that simple, if Jim wants to go walk the dog, we're going to make sure Jim can walk the dog. And if he needs a staff member with him, we're going to figure out how to staff so we can do that, right? Like that's that simple. And maybe it's because, again, we're not a large, corporate organization. We have corporate components, right? But we're 32 residential purpose-built homes. We license for just under 300 residents. And our whole philosophy is it's their house. And we're just, there to help them navigate the day. Some people need more navigation. Some people need less. But at the end of the day, if we take care of our staff and we hear them when they have problems, we support them where we can outside of, 9 to 5, right? We're all going to win. We've, with our housing model, I think we're up to 6 or 7 staff members that have been able to buy their first house from saving money by living in one of our, kind of, attached, apartments, basically.
That's an interesting take. I've never heard that, although I'm not deep into this industry.
It's not uncommon. I mean, it's very uncommon. Most people I've talked to think they can't wrap their heads around why we would provide staff housing. Like I've talked
Well, my first thought, I mean, I can see how that connects the residents to the staff. I'm curious, does the staff have trouble maintaining a separate life, in the off hours?
From what we've seen, no.
Yeah.
No, I mean, really, I think it comes down to buying power, spending power, and saving power, right? I mean, our staff are smart. I mean, just because they're caregivers, that doesn't mean their intellect's any less than you and I, right? They're smart. They know, a lot of them know dollars and cents, right? If I can save money on my rent, that's money I can either blow, right, and buy a car, or save it in a bank account, or maybe I give it to family members that need some help, right? I mean, at the end of the day, remember, we think caregiving is an unskilled role. It might just not, it's not an unskilled role. It might be an unlicensed role because you're not a licensed nurse or something. It doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It doesn't mean you don't know how to do things, right? It means you're not licensed. That's it. And I think we've got to stop assuming caregivers are unskilled. Like I hear that, like, oh, it's an unskilled. I'm like, no, it's just they're unlicensed. Doesn't mean they're unskilled.
There's no centralized agency that distributes licenses for emotional intelligence.
No, God, no.
So I'm going to ask you a separate question,
please.
coming at it from a different angle.
Yeah.
So, for somebody, a family who's starting to encounter this, oftentimes, in some cases, it'll be pretty swift, where the need for this type of assistance is over a weekend, unfortunately, and in other cases, it's a slow wreck that you see coming from a mile away. What advice would you give to those families as they're watching it or have seen it happen? What questions should they be asking as they approach some of these different facilities? And included in that answer, maybe you can sort of break down the delta or the distinction between assured senior living and sort of a nursing home, or any of the other variable type living quarters that are options.
So I always think estate planning at a young age is important. And I mean that, whether you're 30, 40, 50 years old, you've got to just start getting your estate together and make sure you don't forget to update it. And obviously you can get complex with estate planning if you're very wealthy, but everybody needs an estate plan and a living will, or at least, I think some of these states use 5 wishes, just an idea of, God forbid, if something goes sideways, what do you really want? I think that's where we start for everybody. And again, 30, 40-year-olds doesn't mean you're going to die tomorrow, but having just at least something is helpful, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be overly complicated, because we've seen time where it's caught people quickly, and then that person doesn't have the legal capacity to be able to even execute a power of attorney anymore. And what do you do then? Well, you got to get the courts involved, and that's got to, that gets, more complicated, right? So start with estate planning and at least have a general broad idea of what you want to have happen. And then you've got to really start looking at what matters to the family and to that person. And if it's a shiny new object in the room, you want luxury and eloquence, and that's all that matters. You want a big, shiny building, that's fine. But just know what you're going to get with that. You're not getting care. You're not getting attention. You're getting the luxury components of, great bars, great restaurants. You're getting some care, right? You're getting more of the amenities of looks and then feel, right? Because their models, the luxury models, are definitely different, right, than our model. I think you've got to figure out, are you more concerned about quality of care or more concerned about the type of building and location? We've had families that are willing to drive 30 minutes, an hour for our care versus putting someone right down the street because our care is better. Our buildings look like a 4,000 square foot ranch style home, so they don't compare to a 4-story hearth, fireplace, swimming pool community. But we'll beat the crap out of them when it comes to actual care and compassion, because when you staff 1 to 4, that's what you get. You get attention. We don't use call buttons because our residents don't need to wait for us. We're proactive in the care. So a big question I always say for every community, us included, when families come and ask us the things I said, you've got to ask, what is your actual hands-on care staffing ratio? A lot of communities will give you a staffing ratio that accounts for everyone in the building. So from the maintenance guys to the dining, to the dining room, to the kitchen, culinary staff, they'll add that in their staffing ratio. So they'll say, oh, we've got a 1-to-5 staffing ratio. We've got, and do you know that counts the gardener outside, the bus driver who takes them to, the mall, the business office manager who does your invoicing, right? It doesn't go to who's going to change their clothes, who's going to be there if they slip and fall, right? We've got to get to who's actually taking care of this person when they need us. Because newsflash, assisted living, they need us. They're living there with assistance. And we've got to have the people there. Technology, I think, supplements or augments humans to remove the human from elements that don't need tech, so we can put more human capital at the point of physical and emotional contact. That's how we look at it.
Right. So I would imagine there's a spectrum of residents there, from those who just need some assistance, but are relatively, maybe physically they need some assistance, but their mental faculties remain there. They still remain somewhat independent on one side of the spectrum, and on the other, maybe there are those who really can't communicate anymore, or have sort of an absent look on their face and are transported elsewhere. What challenges do you encounter to that spectrum? Do you tend to isolate or separate those into different communities? How does that affect the residents? What's your take on that?
We try to curate the houses by acuity, essentially. And what I mean by that is we try to do our best to ensure like-minded people are together, whether they're like-minded, more advanced dementia or more physically, because at the end of the day, we need to make sure they're not only physically cared for, but emotionally and socially cared for. And if you think about it, it'd be equivalent to, putting a on grade level math student with, an honors advanced math student at the same grade. You're doing a disservice to both of them, right? Because the advanced math student might feel like they need to be dumbed down to understand what the on grade level is, and vice versa. Same thing for cognitive or physical care. You don't want to necessarily be reminded of where you're going, right? You don't want to be like, wait, I know I've got memory issues. I know I'm kind of in that early-ish middle stage, right? That's what advanced looks like?
Right.
No, thank you. I want to be over here where I don't feel that, I want to be over here with super active people. Well, what happens is when you put somebody that has cognitive issues, mild to moderate, with super active, they never self-start. So they actually end up pulling back because they're embarrassed about being with people that are more active than they are. And so then you now create this spiral where they actually accelerate their decline faster because they're now withdrawing. They're less emotional, less social. But if you find that right social component, they thrive because they can still hold conversations, albeit maybe it's a little circular. Who cares? They can still be encouraged to do tasks with support, right? Like, hey, let's get dressed today. Oh, are you sure? I thought I did. No, let's go, let's go change your shirt. Oh, okay. Some of those things, right? Versus where maybe in more of an independent or active, they'd be like, you need to go get dressed. I am dressed. Well, no, you're in your pajamas. No, I'm not. Then it starts spinning that way, right? And then obviously with the advanced component, whether physical or cognitive, you can do some really cool things because you can really get on their, get in their level and really, we do music therapy. So you can do a different type of music therapy. We do aromatherapy, right? So there's maybe some more touch and hands-on components that we can slow down even more for someone more advanced because they respond well to physical and maybe music, right? Because the auditory complex of the brain is usually the last one ever to be affected in any form of dementia from the research. But at the end of the day, it's all in the approach. It's how our team approaches someone on their aging journey. And we just have to make sure our team has the skill set to know, I'm going to approach this person who's more advanced a little bit differently than this person who's maybe more physical care needs, right? And when you do that, everyone can really thrive because you're not, putting them in a box and forcing them to be like everybody else.
So let's take a step back. I mean, you've been in this business now for a decade and a half. And at this point, you've probably seen a transition in the people who are selecting these facilities, right? They now it's sort of graduated gradually, obviously, but it's a new generation that are putting, their parents or their peers into these facilities. How, if any, have you seen aging change over that last decade and a half?
So I will say, definitely even post COVID, we've noticed a big swing. People are waiting longer and are much more advanced and need more care quicker. We, I
Can you
personally,
break that down a little bit
yeah.
further?
So we're seeing much more further cognitive, challenges. I mean, they're talking more moderate to advanced moving in, more physical where you're needing wheelchairs, more hands-on assists immediately from the beginning. There's no gradual decline. They're coming in very heavy care. Whether it's maybe it's elopement risk where they can't be on their even in a traditional unsecured assisted living where they can just walk out the door and never find their way back, right? They're having a lot of the executive functionings are not capable. They're not there for it. um, we're seeing more aggressive behaviors for dementia because it's gone on kind of long without being properly managed and engaged, right? Because families are overwhelmed. We're seeing families being crunched financially, so they're trying to keep mom or dad at home longer because things are getting more expensive to provide care, whether it's home care or in community. We're seeing more isolation because we have this stigma in America that we've done a big push. We want to age at home. That's not going to work. We don't have the staff nor the caregivers, nor is it healthy from what I've seen over the years here. The more isolated we are promoting for our older adults, the worse health outcomes we're going to continue to have. And we are seeing that over and over again. Yeah. So we are seeing a lot of heavy care and a lot more cognitive and physical and emotional challenges coming in immediately versus kind of on a slower decline.
So is the inference there that people have waited longer to introduce this concept? What do you attribute that to? I mean, there was isolation obviously for a couple of years there. Is it the fear? Is it apprehension about putting people into this? Is it the unknown? Is it a transition to new generations and different decision making? Do you see any commonalities there?
I will say, I think for my mom, especially, it's caregiver guilt. I would think would be way up there. Caregiver guilt, being guilty of putting mom somewhere. I think that's a big part. I think the apprehension is the horror stories we hear from this industry. I don't think people understand there is a big difference between assisted living, memory care, in nursing home / skilled nursing, right? I think we get everything lumped together. There's also a difference in size. There's a difference between a 100-bed assisted living and a 20-bed and an 8-bed, right? There's a difference between a 40-bed memory care, a 10-bed memory care, right? There's a difference between a nursing home memory care. I think families don't have the resources or the tools or the clarity as to what's what. I think we keep kicking the can down the road for how we help just educate, whether it's from a state, local, or federal level, as to what it is. I think we create our own internal bias based on the litigious society that we live in for always looking for that other shoe to drop, essentially. And I also see there's a lot of sharks that just want to make money, and they're going to tell you what you want to hear. And I think that drives people to be fearful of making the wrong decision. I also think a lot of families feel better putting mom in a pretty place because it makes them feel better about putting mom somewhere versus acknowledging this is mom's new home. Again, our philosophy for Assured is they are aging at home. The difference is they're aging at home with us. That's where we look at it, because we are literally a 4,000, 5,000 square foot ranch style home, depending on what, kind of what house you're in. It has a traditional kitchen. We do the laundry, right? It feels like a house because it is. And so we try to explain to families, hey, they're aging at home. This is just their new home.
So a couple of things there. First of all, what would you respond to, how would you address from your perspective, guilt? The guilt of putting somebody in. I mean, because, on one hand, I can appreciate that from the perspective of someone putting an individual into that care facility. But on the other, I think you probably get a unique perspective as to what the alternative can be and what the results are of delaying that. And, to some degree, I would imagine if they're put into these facilities sooner, their capacity to defend against some of this mental decline probably gets improved upon, or at least defended against better than trying to do it later.
So I'm going to do a little selfish plug. I had my mom on the Mavericks of Senior Living podcast, and we had a whole 40-minute discussion on her guilt. She told her whole story. There were even tears involved. I was pretty emotional with her. It really came down to when right before my grandfather passed, he asked my mom to take care of my grandmother and never put her anywhere. And that was a big thing that was in her core belief, that she made this promise to her dad that she wasn't going to put grandma anywhere, in any level of care. And he did a great job leaving my grandmother really well off. He was good with his money. He had a great pension retirement from GM. So she could have stayed at home, and we tried home care. I will tell you, the emotional stress on both of them, it was pretty rough. Like my mom, she would call me and be like, I just had to fight with your grandmother to take her meds. I can't keep doing this every night. Like your grandma said, she'd call her during the day, like, hey mom, did you take your meds this morning? Yeah, I did, Lynn. Yeah, they're fine. She'd go in because she ended up moving her across the street. She'd go over there, never touch her pills. Just didn't take them. So there's my mom at 9:00 at night arguing with my grandmother. You got to take your meds, Mom. What about, why do I got to take so many damn pills? It's like, well, this pill is for, your blood pressure. This is for your, and she'd walk through it over. And my grandmother, has some cognitive decline. I wouldn't say she's on the advanced level. It's more that early middle stage of just kind of general aging forgetfulness. But it still was a constant, back and forth battle. And then, we saw weight loss from my grandmother because she, wasn't eating as consistent. The hydration wasn't there, all those physical things. But, then we started seeing more like social issues. Like grandma didn't want to leave the house at all. She'd come over a little bit for my parents, to have dinner with them, but she wasn't going out to the seniors center to do cards or play any games. And so finally, I kind of, after probably about 4 years of working my mom, we found a place in Michigan for my grandmother. And honestly, grandma's going to be 97 in January. And I kid you not, she is crushing it. Like she gets her hair done every Friday. She goes bingo twice a week. She's got, she goes out to lunch with, in the dining room with neighbors of hers. She is doing really well because we found that social component for her, right? She's still getting the caregivers in there to take care of her, but we shifted the dynamic to where she's around people that are like-minded, when it comes to where they are in their aging journey. And so it took my mom seeing that for about a year to realize, you know what, darn it, I should have done this earlier. I was selfish. I didn't realize that how many things I couldn't give my mom because I had my own life, and it was putting stress on my parents. My dad would come over and help, and then they're stressed out. They're both stressed. My mom would be concerned if she'd ever come even out to Colorado to visit my family and my kids, right? I have 3 kids, and they'd be concerned leaving grandma, even though there was plenty of people around. She would still be, I can't leave grandma. Like, who's going to check on her? What if something happens if I'm not here? And so I think it all comes from a good place. I really, really do. I just think we do a poor job of supporting each other in the community. Like, she shouldn't have to feel so lost that she's in this alone. And that's what's happening to so many caregivers. And a lot of times it's the eldest female, it's females in general that are taking the brunt of this. And they're not being supported by, whether it's additional family members, whether it's community people. They're not being told, you're doing a great job. 98% of your job is just to show up for your loved one. Don't worry about all the other BS. Just, and so I think it comes from what we, this idea in America that we have to be this individualistic nature. Like, if I can't do it by myself, then I shouldn't do it. Versus newsflash, human beings are actually very social. We form our cliques and our pods for a reason, right? And it's not going to change when you get older. So yeah, you might get a little more, desire to not be as social, but it's one of those things that I think we got to just do it better to support each other in the community.
That's a great response. I love that. I think that's super illuminating. And just to be completely honest, I got a text earlier this morning about my own grandmother and from my mom about what's going on with her. And she isn't the eldest female. And it's a tough road. I mean, the burden that falls on that person is significant, and so I appreciate that take. On that note, and something you mentioned earlier, and I'm going to combine two parts. One is, the education, right? I sort of liken this to whether it's life insurance or some sort of investing. It's like there's no the amount of importance that high schools place on social studies or these other elements, which I think are important, right? But I think it's probably more important for people to understand how to balance a checkbook, even though they don't really use checkbooks anymore, but to understand debt and sort of where your money's going. But there's really no education on that front, and a lot of it falls onto us as individuals to go proactively curate the resources and depending upon your network, that might not be available. What suggestions, if any, do you have for somebody going through this to one, inform themselves, and two, find a network that might help to support them? And I think that network would also facilitate some of the education. But do you have any suggestions for somebody sort of facing this?
There's actually some pretty good stuff on YouTube and TikTok now and the Instagram shorts. One of my favorite people in the entire world, her name is Dementia Darling. Carrie Alberts is her name. She does a lot at Instagram and TikTok, excuse me. A wonderful, beautiful soul person, knowledgeable. She is phenomenal. So her channel, I think, is really great for quick, under a minute tips. There's another one. I think it's Be Light Care. This young lady is, again, I think if I recall, she was a speech pathologist, really knowledgeable. Another great one that gives some great tips as well too. There's the Dementia Divas that have Dr. Teepa Snow, and then also Carrie Alberts, and one more that have a show that talks about some of this stuff. It's really cool what they're doing there as well too. I'm trying to look it up right now, but I can send you over so you can put in your show notes some more of the specific here. But it's how they talk about it. It's not this just this destructive disease, right? I mean, we host a dementia friendly night out once a month, end of the month in Castle Rock. And the whole concept is spouses, families come together with their person living with dementia, because dementia isn't the end, right? It's just a change in the ending. And that's the thing that I've sworn by for a long time is any of these curveballs we get from a diagnosis, it's not the end today. Yeah. Does it mean the end's going to be somewhere sooner or later? Absolutely. We're all going to have an end. It's kind of just changing how we get to that end, right? And it's really what we look at during those challenges of what we want to get out of life. If we want to be bitter and resentful that we got this, well, yeah, that's going to suck, right?
Yeah.
But if we want to bring our network in and be honest and truthful and forthcoming, man, like, hey, and I think guys have to do it better. I think we have a mental health issue for men. I mean, on top of those that have served in the military, right? And I think that we've got to do a better job supporting, all those men and women that have come back from active duty and so forth, about it's okay to just be like, man, this sucks. Like, I don't know what to do here. I mean, I can't handle this alone. Like, I still know what to do. I mean, we got to be okay when it comes to that, because it's going to kill us all little by little if we try to hold these mental burdens together. I mean, I had a talk with my therapist, I want to say probably about maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I was just like, man, I feel like over the last, by that point, it was about 12 years, 11 years, I said, man, I don't know anymore. Like, I just feel like I'm getting hammered by seeing all this death. Like, it's really starting to kind of rattle my head a little bit. Like, everybody we take care of dies in our care. That's, which is great. That means we did our job, right? That means we gave them the best quality of life, and we bring in hospice and all those things. But when I started kind of thinking about it, I was like, that's pretty heavy. He's like that. I mean, the amount of people that I've got to know that pass in our care, it says that's our goal, right? Is we want them to pass when it's their time, and if we do that, I think we've done our job. But kind of looking on it from my perspective is like, it's kind of heavy. It's kind of heavy when you start looking at this and you're seeing, 400 or 500 people now that I've, maybe it's up to almost, I don't know how many people we've kind of over the last 15 years of taking care of, but it's in the several thousands. Majority of those people have gone on to, gone on and, if you're religious, gone on to heaven, right? In my perspective, but it's pretty heavy. And, even now thinking about it, it's like, wow, that, we got to start talking about this stuff, and it's okay that it's hard, right? And it's okay. Yeah. It's uncomfortable.
Well, my own family has resisted, doing an estate plan or the will for many, many years, and I've I've tried to resist that. But for them, I have done it, but my own family resisted it, and I think it's just challenging to think about your own death, and there's a lack of willingness to accept it. But it is, we're all dying, at different stages. We're all inching there one by one. And I'm going to throw a sort of a deeper question. Is I'd like to sort of transition to hear a little bit more about the journey in sort of getting this off the ground, but with your perspective, because you're seasoned, you're grizzled, you've had scars, you're in the business of death to some degree, and you've witnessed it firsthand. You've personally seen it within your own life, in your own family, but also within your business. When you see this mental decline, and you alluded to the religious aspect for many people as that happens, and I'm asking this because it's been something that's I've been reading a lot more about and has become a lot more relevant to my stage in life. But has that changed how you view identity or the self as aging happens? I mean, and I'll just give you a specific example of where I'm coming from, because my Uncle Gene was one of the most charismatic people I've ever met. He taught me a whole part of life I'd never have been exposed to, that I would consider probably one of my favorite parts of life, and it'd be absent without him. And to see his he was quick, he was hilarious, he was well read, he was ingratiating and charming. He could also turn on you a little bit, but that mental acuity was such a wonderful part of his being. And as he declined, you saw sort of that presence get more and more removed inside of his eyes. And I'm wondering if you just have any thoughts on, having witnessed it more than many, if there's, what your take is on that, if anything. You can dodge the question too.
No, I love this question. Again, I'm not going to dodge it. I think this is what we've got to start talking about. I had a post-COVID, I had to really, I was in a dark place post-COVID. We got, it was really my COVID. We did great as a team. But problem is I put 20 pounds on. I was drinking a little more than I wanted to. I was stressed out the gourd of, are we doing it right? What are we doing wrong? What don't we know? Like, oh my, so January of 21, after I got, vaccinated, which again, it is what it is. We had to for healthcare. I don't care what anyone's perspective is. We had to do it to be compliant. Fine. I said to myself, it's time to get back in shape, cut back all that stuff. And I went to the ethos of comfortable being uncomfortable. And so in regards to your question, I believe all of us, I'm, religious, I'm Catholic. We're all image bearers. No matter our journey in life, we all carry an image bearer of what God wanted us to be, of who we are, our ethos. I'm the belief, though, that person isn't ever really lost. It's blocked. I believe that the disease itself blocks that full person from coming through because of the gunk in the brain, let's call it, right? The plaque buildup, whatever it may be, that's preventing that true person from being there, because it's not, that person is still there, and you can see those window moments, but it has to get through that blockage, whatever that is. And so my belief is that they are who they are, and they're different, and that's okay, but they're still who they are, and they're still an image bearer. They still have the capability to bring value to life, to add perspective, to maybe their wit isn't what it used to be 20 years ago, but it's their wit of who they are now. And I think for us as a society, everyone has value at every stage. The idea that because someone's living with dementia, because someone's older, they lost their value to society, that's the furthest thing from the truth. If anything, they're showing us how to live when they're faced with a challenge. they're faced with a terminal diagnosis. They're faced with the unknown. We can learn from how they carry themselves, the good and the bad, through that. And so to me, it's just more enduring and important to recognize they're showing us how to navigate some of this unknown. Mm-hmm. And does it suck for us? Yeah, absolutely. Because we're always remembering who they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. We're not remembering and honoring who they are in that moment. And I think if we can start living a little more in the moment, it would help us all out. And I think someone living and navigating this aging journey, especially with some cognitive impairment, they live in the moment. And that's a beautiful thing at times.
That's so interesting. I think that's beautifully said. I only because I have a small kid, you realize that there's some similarities of the ability to live in the moment between a toddler or an infant and somebody in that elderly state. It's there is something really beautiful about that. But to pivot here, so you talk about stress. Obviously, during the pandemic, for you guys to have navigated that by itself, never mind getting this off the ground from its inception, right? To do it during COVID, the stress, the litigation potential in this industry you mentioned earlier, comfortable being uncomfortable. This is not for the faint of heart. Most businesses aren't, but this is particularly harrowing because it's not just highly regulated. You're dealing with life and death, and that by itself is an enormous business undertaking. But couple that with it's a real estate business as well, right? You've had to learn development. You've had to navigate regulations as it relates to that. Financing components, how to make all that work. You've got your own P&L. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of how you run that business, but I really would like to understand a little of that journey. What resilience, what mental frameworks, what systems have you built for yourself, let alone those you may be, imparting on your team to take the plunge, right? Let's just start from Michigan as a track athlete, and I'd love to talk a little bit about the Olympics at the end. But sort of moving forward from that point, just give us a little bit of a purview, behind the scenes of what courage that required. Was it naivete? Was it there had to have been some moments where you were in over your skis and you had to pull yourself out. I'd love to just get some of those war stories, whatever you're willing to share.
First and foremost, this would not have been possible. It is not possible without Brian Turner, my business partner, one of my best friends. I don't think if I didn't have him throughout this stuff, I think I would have, folded. I mean, it really helps having a guy that you don't want to let down, but also a guy that would do anything for you and you trust through and through. Like that even in our darkest moments, I never had to worry about Brian not being there to help navigate whatever hell we were going through. I mean, that in itself is reassuring. Even as I say that now, I look back and having him in the foxhole makes the world a difference. I mean, you doing it by yourself. I don't know how these solopreneurs do it. I mean, granted, Brian and I have yelled at each other. We fought, been angry, right? But at the end of the day, I trust him 100%. He trusts me, and I know he's got my back, and I will go to the ends of the earth for him. And I think that in itself stemmed from Michigan. We got to know each other, our senior year really well. We lived in the same track house with 9 other guys and our buddy Nick as well too, who was our mutual friend. That was really just learning the ability to time manage and get punched in the face at track practice and still do school and still do all these other things, right? I mean, it was, we'd spend, I don't know, probably I'd guess 30 hours a week down at the track, right? Monday through essentially Saturday. Sundays was, kind of get your stuff and still work out. But I think that taught a lot about resilience there. And then I do think when Brian and I were talking about kind of what we're going to do together, we had real estate was brought up when we kind of lived near each other in DC in 2005. Nothing ever came about of it. But then we got able to both get to Denver in about 2009. And then, we had some of the family stories. My grandfather had Parkinson's. My other grandfather had dementia. His grandmother had just aging health issues, and his mom was a nurse trying to take care of grandma from afar, right? And all the stress there. And we did home care. We did home care because we thought a little naivete. We wanted to do the entrepreneurship we wanted was to have an impact on people. And I have a physics degree. He has an English degree. It's two kind of really different minded people. He's great with numbers and he's good with, he's not your traditional English major. He's great with writing, but super analytical. He's got great, vision and oversight and all those things. And some of the systems he's built financially for us are second to none that he's crafted from the ground up. And that's obviously helped with our banking side. But home care sweat equity goes a long way. We could bust our tail to get business and then recruit caregivers and train them. Like that's where we got our feet wet in the importance of care. 13, we built our first residential memory care from almost scratch. We demoed pretty much, we should have demoed the whole building. We kind of demoed only enough to get the loan. We learned some lessons there. It didn't go well. I think it was at the end of 13, we did that. And it took middle of 15, like May of 15, we got it licensed finally after having to fire the contractor. We had to learn the GC a little bit and it was not fun. It was fun looking back, but man, that was rough. We got that going. Then we tried 2 other projects where we bought some land and wanted to do like a village concept where we'd have, 3 or 4 homes. And we had to learn about zoning and rezoning. And that was, wow. Like on top of running the home care, on top of running the 12 bed memory care, we were still trying to grow and still figure all that out. And we never realized how nasty people can be when you want to rezone a piece of property to help older adults. I remember was she my fiance? Sarah, my wife now, I think she was either my girlfriend or fiance. We told her we had a community meeting, right, about one of the, projects we were going to do. And she's like, is it going to be like Parks and Recs where they scream and yell at you and cuss you out? And I said, I don't think so. I mean, we're just trying to help older adults with memory issues. Like, can't imagine anybody's that angry. We were wrong. She came to that meeting and she sat in the back and she's like, they were screaming at you. I said, yeah. How do you think it felt up there? They were calling you like evil and mean and nasty that you wanted to do this. And I said, yeah, it didn't feel that good, and you don't realize, you think you can have the best idea when it comes to how you want to support aging and you just get spit on. Like, I mean, I walked out of that being like, I now know, when Brian and I were sitting, we grabbed a drink afterwards and we go, I kind of now know why politicians lie. They just want to tell people exactly what they want to hear so they don't get yelled at, because it was like some of it cut to the core. I mean, that was our first real experience of kind of the zoning planning stuff. And I mean, it was personal attacks. I mean, we had one lady who tried to dig dirt up on us. I mean, she point blank told us. We were like, we're 29, 30 years old. What do you think we've done in our lives? Like, I mean, we passed background checks from national and the state to even own home care. Like, we've got to do that anyways, right? And just hearing some of that stories, you're like, okay, this is way more than just real estate, right? It's hospitality. It's, it's medical. It's this whole concept. So we punted on new development and we ended up going the acquisition route. So we acquired a company that had 9 homes in 2016, 17 is when it kind of got finalized. And that added to our portfolio to 10 houses, all kind of what we call secured memory care. In 2000, and we ran that till we always looked for opportunities. In 2021, we acquired 6 properties on the same 2 acres in Arvada. That's now turning into our traumatic brain injury campus, where we are supporting those that are, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old that have had brain injuries, whether it be acquired or traumatic, such as strokes, anoxic brain injuries, or maybe something more catastrophic like, car accidents, head trauma, things like that. And that's a beautiful campus up there. And then in last July, we did an acquisition of 16 assisted livings in the metro area, Centennial, Arapahoe, Littleton area, that added to our total of 32 homes, all ranging from about 8 to 10 residents. And what it came down to is, one, hiring really good people. In 21, we hired an amazing COO. We were able to poach her from a larger kind of organization in senior living who had, she had at that time 20 years experience, I want to say, or 19 years experience. And she ran communities in 28 or 38 states. So she understood the scale, because at our size of 32 scattered sites, there's a lot of logistics involved, a lot of benefit to it, but also the logistics and the operational oversight are really important. And she's helped professionalize us. We've increased our standard operating procedures, all of that stuff. I mean, a lot of the big things that we've done is brought in technology that enables us to be present in a home without being present. It's called Serenity Connect. And our staff uploads, every resident has their own Slack channel, essentially. It's all HIPAA compliant secured. So our staff sends families updates daily of how their loved one's doing. And we as a team have internally messaging on there as well too. So we can always know from our COO down to our frontline staff exactly what's going on in every home. We also use an EMR or electronic health record that enables us to get real-time updates of when a med was passed, when it isn't passed, so we can intervene immediately and solve what's going on as well too. So we've used tech a lot as a big thing. A lot of our standard stuff that, Steph's really brought in how we report better, we more efficient from an operating procedure. And then Brian's done a ton of works with tracking our P&Ls in a global sense so that we have very quick and easy reporting when it comes to presenting to the banks. He's also created some really good flows for us to do a quick analytics of if we looking at an organization to acquire, we can dump in what their P&L is. And if we run how it is, what it should show up if we do it the right way. So then we can then go to our bank and be like, hey, you've seen our track record now for coming up on, 13 years. This is how we run our properties. Our numbers usually hold pretty accurate after we get stable. This is what it's going to be. Can we, what do we need to do to get this banked? Right. And so the underwriting component he's done, a ton of work with, and it looks really good when we want to analyze if we should be able to acquire this, organization or these properties as well too. Really for us, at the end of the day, it's resilience. I mean, you're going to get punched in the face. You're going to get punched in the face over and over. And if you have to believe in your mission more than anything else, and you have to believe in your team. The mission has to matter more than yourself, and then your team has to matter more than you. I read this, I can't remember the author, but it's The Mission, Men, and Me. It's about this special operations guy. Enthralled by how the small team tactics of, special operations warfare, things like that. Yeah, you're going to be punched in the face. You're going to have challenges and headaches, right? It's how you respond to those that matter at the end of the day. If you're not prepared if you think it's going to be smooth sailing immediately, and you're not going to have to put a ton of sweat equity, you're not going to question, should I be doing this? You're probably not ready for it because they're not anymore now that our team is bigger, but there are definitely times Brian looked at each other and go, man, should we keep doing this? Like, are we okay?
Your why has to be pretty strong. There's no question. Especially,
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to start a business. It's like a championship team. It is a feat to win a championship, but to win a championship year after year is sort of another stratosphere of discipline and, really focus. And so a couple of things, you mentioned, being uncomfortable, sort of the stresses of doing this, resilience. And as you guys were expanding, I'm going to use the analogy that actually you guys were sort of using, which is that, you don't rise to the level of your aspirations, you fall to the level of your systems. And having good systems is what enables you to continue to persevere. What would you tell somebody who's starting out, or even your younger self, knowing, in hindsight, what you went through, the sleepless nights, the going over your skis, and I love that you brought up that community meeting, because it's no joke. And by the way, are these facilities? Did you take in any investors? Or are you guys self-funding?
We've been able to be self-funded. We have bank financing. We've been able to be self-funding because Brian, and I give him all the credit. I mean, we always lived well below. We still do. We don't take, we leave a lot of the money in the organization. We always reinvest back into it. But the way he's controlled our finances has been just phenomenal. I mean, that's like phenomenal.
Well, that's a whole separate category you've managed to, avoid. But, when you get yelled at and you find this resistance, it's almost as though no good deed goes unpunished, right? And everybody's got a perspective, and those who oppose you clearly don't share your perspective. And in many cases, I think in today's world, you're limited to 150 characters or a meme or a video, and it's fair, right? I mean, to some degree, we all have families, we've got obligations, and we can't do a deep dive into everything. So oftentimes people are just reading that headline and they're making a judgment on the headline, when in reality, there are many spokes to that wheel that need to be incorporated. Knowing all of this, what advice would you give to someone or your younger self going through this?
Brian said it best: stay in your lane, stay at what you're good at. We had opportunity probably do some investments outside of our scope. People were just, and we turned them down, because we're experts, and we even closed our home care business once we started to run these homes as efficient as well and provide the quality of care that we do at the pricing we do. We put everything into that. We did not try to go out and get a 100-bed community. It might be easier to run, right? We didn't try to venture into running doctors, whatever it may be. We stayed and became experts in our area of residential assisted living and memory care and traumatic brain injury. Right? We focused extensively on one area, and we just crushed our competition. I mean, that's what we did. I mean, and again, I don't think we have competition in the global sense, because there's more than enough to go around, when it comes to care. And I mean, crushed is, we stayed true to ourselves and we crushed our goals we set for us. And I think the other part is being okay not always having all the answers. But also, I think being curious about how I find more out about a subject. Like, I studied intently on brain care and I still read weird. My wife's always like, "What are you reading?" Like, "You want to look?" She goes, "Oh God, that's so boring." It's a recent study from NIH on, dementia and the impact of music. Like, I'll read some weird stuff and she'll look at me and go, "We read totally different books." I go, "We definitely do," but it's diving into your subject so that you understand what you're doing and how you can relate better to not only your residents, but the family members that might have questions. Go, "Is that okay for dad to do that?" Like, "Well, yeah, of course it is. I mean, it's just, it doesn't bother us." She's like, "Really? But it seems weird." It's like, "Well, so he is who he is," and you can kind of explain some of the science behind why that happens. Right. And yeah, so to me, it's stay in your lane, stay what you're good at. Don't get outside your lane until you're a multi-billionaire, which, that's why, don't start investing in everything you can under the sun. Get to be really proficient at one thing and do it really, really well with a lot of passion, and you're going to be okay.
Great advice. So, any sweeping predictions about the future of aging or this industry?
Yes. I think we're going to have a further separation between the healthy and the unhealthy. What I mean by that is I think we're going to have there's the Dr. Sinclair, right? Look at Stanford University's longevity institute they have up there. You look at the Huberman Lab, right? Some of the podcasts. You're going to have a core that's going to start looking at what can I do today to make myself healthy before it becomes an issue. Not, "Oh crap, I'm 100 pounds overweight. I've been eating all this processed food for 20 years. Now I want to kind of catch myself," right? I think you're going to see that, and then I also think you're going to see the further privatization of medical care, which is going to create a bigger separation as well too. You're seeing a lot more of the doctors that are primary cares that are going to cash pay, right? Where the subscription model of, $100 a month, whatever it may be, right? Concierge medicine. Thank you. Couldn't think of it. Concierge medicine. I think you're going to see an increased amount of that, especially under 65, right? That of those that can afford that, you're going to see better care. You're going to see social determinants are going to have a bigger impact on how long you live, how long your health span is, not just your lifespan, right? Because you'd said it earlier. We want a long lifespan, right? Let's say this, we want a long lifespan. We want our health span to be as close to the end of that lifespan as possible, right? I don't want someone that lives to be 100 where 30 years, they just feel like crap. Like, what quality of life do you have for that? I also think if we want to have an impact on aging and health and all that stuff in America, because it's an American issue, but it's a world issue as well too. We need to look beyond. We need to get more creative with how we afford this, right? What can we do for affordability? And I think it's going to be some type of triangle. I think it's going to be a public-private philanthropic partnership. I think we're going to have to figure that out because, in my opinion, we cannot be a civilized society if we do not find a way to improve the base level quality of care for all those that are aging, regardless of their social financial status. And everyone can say it, well, it's a one payer medical system. I will challenge you and say it is absolutely not. England, in their aging, what they call board and care homes, have a dramatic difference between the have and have not. So it is not a single payer system that's going to solve that. It is not. I mean, there are plenty of issues facing Europe right now when it comes to aging between the have and have nots. NHS, is strained for how they're going to do. I have friends that do this similar work over there in Europe. They're trying, but we've got to find a way to solve that, because we're going to have more older adults on the street homeless if we don't come up with better solutions, because we're pricing too many people out of the market.
Well, that's a whole separate subject. I mean, we could have a 2-hour conversation just on that. Well, look, I really appreciate your time. I think there's so much good material here, especially for those who are navigating this or will be. And to be fair, all of us will be facing some form of this in one way or another, whether it's directly or indirectly. So I think you provided a wealth of information. I did want to note, the podcast that you were referencing, we'll be sure to include that on the show notes. And I appreciate you sort of going personal there. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up here?
One, I appreciate the opportunity, Marcus. I mean, like I said, it's great to have the opportunity to just talk about this, and because I do think if we go into aging a little more eyes open, I hate that phrase, but really more eyes open, it's just going to be more accepting and understanding for where we are in our journey, right? It's aging is not a negative. It's a beautiful thing, and it should be one that's honored and revered, not sneered at and frustrated by. And because there are plenty of people who never made it past the age of 20 that I'm sure would love to make it to 50, right? And plenty of people that are 50 that would have said, man, I'd love to make it to 80. So while society can sometimes pick and choose when ageism is appropriate, right? When we want to promote ageism or it's anti-age, whatever it may be, we need to remember that aging and ageism can't be a talking point only when it benefits us. It has to be talking points that benefit everyone, because we all are aging and there is beauty in it. And regardless of your beliefs for spirituality or religion, we're all image bearers of some type. I believe it's image bearer of God. You don't have to agree with that, but we're image bearers of something, an ethos, a core, a belief. And that belief, that image bearer can be someone that's 80, 90, can also be a 2-year-old, right? Or a 1-year-old, right? Or a 10-year-old, right? So we got to remember that there's value in everybody, no matter their age.
Thank you. Thank you. And what would be the best way for people to get in touch with you, and who would you be most interested in hearing from?
I'd love to hear from people that are scared about aging. I mean, to me, I don't want anybody to be fearful to get older. So you obviously can easily go, check out my LinkedIn page, Francis LeGasse. I'll put that in the show notes on LinkedIn. My Instagram is Francis Legacy, Legacy. And then you can always shoot me an email, francis@assuredsl.com. Happy to, again, answer questions. At the end of the day, I want people to make informed decisions with the best information at that time. And also feel a sense of peace that it's okay that I'm going to be 35 tomorrow. It's okay I'm going to be 60 tomorrow. It's okay I'm going to be 80 tomorrow, right? Because that's a pretty cool story to tell.
Great advice. Thank you, Francis. It's been wonderful having you on. I appreciate you coming.
Thanks, Marcus. It's been awesome. And I look forward to, following your journey here as you get more the episodes out.